The rigid refusal by lawmakers to compromise underscores the disturbing findings of one study on democracy in the US. According to a Washington Post editorial, data from the Center for Systemic Peace finds the US no longer technically qualifies as a democracy after the Trump administration years. It's somewhere between a democracy and an autocratic state. Barbara Walter is a professor of international relations at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at the University of California, San Diego. She joins me now, and I'm delighted. I mean, when we look at the research, it's frankly frightening, and you conclude that the US is, quote, closer to civil war than any of us would like to believe. How close?
Well, I've been studying civil wars for the last 30 years across the globe. And in fact, the last 4 years, I've been on a task force run by the CIA that tries to predict where outside the United States a civil war, political violence, and instability is likely to break out. And we actually know now that the two best predictors of whether violence is likely to happen are whether a country is an anocracy, and that's a fancy term for a partial democracy, and whether ethnic entrepreneurs have emerged in a country that are using racial, religious, or ethnic divisions to try to gain political power. And the amazing thing about the United States is that both of these factors currently exist, and they have emerged at a surprisingly fast rate.
What's remarkable is the research isn't based on sentiment. It's based on metrics and markers and signs and facts that the US uses to determine the state of other countries' democracies and proximity to upheaval. So if the US were looking at another country and saw these signs, what would be the US evaluation of that country?
The US would look at that country and we would put that country likely at risk, we quote unquote, risk of civil war. The United States is pretty close to being at high risk of civil war. And once a country is at high risk, the task force puts it on what we call a watch list. Countries that the agency wants to watch very closely because they believe sometime in the next few years, that country is at high risk of descending into instability or political violence.
Wow. I think most Americans automatically assume, truly believe that democracy is sacrosanct in this country, that the system is solid and safe and impervious. What do you say to them? How do you punch through complacency?
What I say to them is we all wish that the United States was a strong democracy. We all see it that way, but the reality is just not true. The United States has been declining as a democracy for the last 5 years on every measure. There are multiple different data sets that measure democracy in various different ways, and all of them have showed America in decline. And in fact, the main measure that the task force uses to predict political violence, it comes from a data set called the Polity data set. They have actually classified the United States for the very first time as an anocracy, not a full democracy, not a partial democracy. Some people call it a hybrid democracy. Fareed Zakaria has called it an illiberal democracy, but it is certainly not considered on par with countries like Switzerland or Canada or Denmark or Japan. We are no longer considered the world's longest democracy. That ended in January of 2021.